Long ago, there was a poor old blind man in China who was blessed with a beautiful daughter, Xinjiang. She was very kind and generous, and she was the bright light of her father's dark life. One day, while wandering in the woods, he lost his balance and fell into a water hole. Despite all effort to climb out, he did not have enough strength to pull himself out, and he gave way to his despair and was certain he would drown. Suddenly, he heard a voice nearby speak to him. "Old man, if you promise to give 300 bushels of rice to the temple in the name of Buddha, you will not drown and you will be able to see once again." The old blind man, fearful of losing his beautiful daughter Xinjiang, replied quickly, "I promise." And soon after, he felt strong arms pull him from the water. He believed that the Buddha himself had come to save him. The old man blinked a few times, waiting for his eyesight to return, but sadly this did not happen. Then he remembered in horror what he had promised. He was poor and did not have any money to buy even 1 bushel of rice, never mind 300. He had made a promise he could never keep, and he told himself that he deserved any punishment that came his way. Feeling defeated and distressed, he staggered all the way home and wept as he confessed his mistake to his daughter. Xinjiang was sad to see her father in distress and tried to comfort him. "Do not worry, father. I will help you. I will get the rice for your promised offering." And the very next day, Xinjiang quickly made her way to the village market and immediately sought out the wealthiest merchant. "I am here to offer myself to the Dragon King," she told him. "And in return, you must promise to give 300 bushels of rice to the temple in my father's name." The merchant was delighted to receive this offering, because for many years the Dragon King, the Eastern Sea, was in search of a bride, but the merchants refused to offer their daughters in matrimony. As such, the angry Dragon King sent wild storms at sea that sank the merchants' ships. Many of the merchants would offer a reward to anyone willing to sacrifice his daughter to the Dragon King. And now, here stood this poor but beautiful girl. Overjoyed, the merchant happily accepted her offer. As his sailors carried the girl to sea, the merchant sent 300 bushels of rice to the temple. Soon after, the poor old blind man heard about his daughter's fate, and even so, his eyesight still did not return. His only one joy in life was now gone, and he sank deeply into despondency and grief. Xinjiang expected she would quickly drown as the merchants dropped her overboard at sea. Yet to her surprise, she discovered that she could breathe underwater and soon saw the beautiful underwater palace of the Dragon King and was greeted by the king himself. The king was soon enchanted by Shimchung's kindness and beauty, and as time passed, he became a kind and loving husband. They lived happily together beneath a calm, gentle sea. Even though Shimchung adored her king husband, she often thought of her dear father. She wept whenever she thought of her father's heartbreak, and she would often gaze up toward the surface of the sea. The Dragon King loved his wife very much, and her sadness became his. Love of my life, my love for you is deep like the sea, and so I must set you free so you can once again see your father. No one will believe that you are still alive, so to keep you safe, I will disguise you. And with that, he turned her into a beautiful lotus flower that slowly drifted away from the palace. That same day, a village fisherman noticed an unusual but lovely flower floating upon the sea, and he decided to gift this treasure to the emperor who ruled the land. The emperor loved the beautiful flower, and he placed it in the pond of his garden, and he often sat there for hours gazing at it. Then one night, when the emperor could not sleep, he wandered toward his pond in the garden, and to his surprise, he saw a lovely girl standing near the water. He gasped and asked, "Who are you?" Shimchung blushed. "It is I," she said. "I am the lotus flower you love." The emperor understood at once why his love for his beautiful blossom was so deep. He slowly approached the lovely girl and softly whispered, "Shimchung, will you marry me?" "I will," Shimchung said, for she could see that the emperor was an honorable man, and she had enjoyed his company. "But I have one request. We must invite every blind man in the country to our wedding," she said. The emperor happily agreed. Their wedding day soon arrived, and Shimchung waited eagerly as each guest entered the hall, her heart beating fast each time she saw an old blind man. But each time she was disappointed, as not one was her father. The emperor noticed Shimchung looking anxious. "Why do you look worried, Blossom?" the emperor asked. "There is one person I must see again," she said softly. And just then, an old man entered the hall, leaning on one shoulder of the steward. His clothes were ragged. He was covered with dust from the journey, and he was so weak he could hardly walk. "My father, it is I," she cried, and she ran to embrace him. When the old man heard that sweet, familiar voice of his cherished daughter, he opened his eyes and could see. Instantly, his eyes filled with tears of joy at the sight of his beautiful daughter Shimchung. And the very next day, many of the merchant ships returned to port, safe and sound on the gentle waves of the Eastern Sea.
Once in China, there lived an old widow and her son Chen. The widow was known all over for the brocades that she made on her loom, weaving threads of silver, gold, and colored silk into her cloth. She made pictures of flowers, birds, and animals, so real they seemed almost alive. People said there were no brocades finer than the ones the widow wove. One day, the widow took a pile of brocades to the marketplace, where she quickly sold them. Then she went about buying her household needs. All at once, she stopped. Oh my! Her eye had been caught by a beautiful painted scroll that hung in one of the stalls. It showed a marvelous palace, all red and yellow and blue and green, reaching delicately to the sky. All around were fantastic gardens, and walking through them, the loveliest maidens. "Do you like it?" asked the stall keeper. "It's a painting of Sun Palace. They say it lies far to the east and is home of many fairy ladies." "It's wonderful," said the widow with a shiver and a sigh. "It makes me want to be there." Though it cost most of her money, the widow could not resist buying the scroll. When she got back to her cottage, she showed it to her son. "Look, Chen, have you ever seen anything more beautiful? How I would love to live in that palace, or at least visit it." Chen looked at her thoughtfully. "Mother, why don't you weave the picture as a brocade? That would be almost like being there." "Why, Chen, what a marvelous idea. I'll start at once." She set up her loom and began to weave. She worked for hours, then days, then weeks, barely stopping to eat or sleep. Her eyes grew bloodshot and her fingers raw. "Mother," said Chen anxiously, "shouldn't you get more rest?" "Oh, Chen, it's so hard to stop. While I weave, I feel like I'm there at Sun Palace, and I don't want to come away." Because the widow no longer wove brocades to sell, Chen cut firewood and sold that instead. Months went by, while inch by inch the pattern appeared on the loom. One day, Chen came in to find the loom empty and the widow sobbing. "What's wrong, Mother?" he asked in alarm. She looked at him tearfully. "I finished it." The brocade was laid out on the floor, and there it all was, the palace reaching to the sky, the beautiful gardens, the lovely fairy ladies. "It looks so real," said Chen in amazement. "I feel like I could just step into it." Just then, a sudden wind whipped through the cottage. It lifted the brocade, blew it out of the window, and carried it through the air. The widow and her son rushed outside, only to watch the brocade disappear into the east. "It's gone," cried the widow, and she fainted away. Chen carried her to her bed and sat beside her for many hours. At last her eyes opened. "Chen," she said weakly, "you must find the brocade and bring it back. I cannot live without it." "Don't worry, Mother. I'll go at once." Chen gathered a few things and started to the east. He walked for hours, then days, then weeks, but there was no sign of the brocade. One day, Chen came upon a lonely hut. Sitting by the door was an old leathered-skinned woman smoking a pipe. A horse was grazing nearby. "Hello, dearie," said the woman. "What brings you so far from home?" "I'm looking for my mother's brocade. The wind carried it to the east." "Ah, yes," said the woman. "The brocade of Sun Palace." "Well, that wind was sent by the fairy ladies of the palace itself. They're using the brocade as a pattern for weaving." "But my mother will die without it." "Well, then you had best get it back. But you won't get to Sun Palace by foot, so you'd better ride my horse. It will show you the way." "Thank you," said Chen. "Oh, don't thank me yet, dearie. Between here and there, you must pass through the flames of Fiery Mountain. If you make a single sound of complaint, you'll be burnt to ashes. After that, you must cross the icy sea. The smallest word of discontent, and you'll be frozen solid. Do you still want to go?" "I must get back my mother's brocade." "Good boy. Take the horse and go." Chen climbed on, and the horse broke into a gallop. Before long, they came to a mountain all on fire. Without missing a step, the horse started up the slope, leaping through the flames. Chen felt the fire singe his skin, but he bit his lip and made not a sound. At last, they came down the other side. Chen was surprised to find that his burns were gone. A little later, they came to a sea filled with great chunks of ice. Without pausing a moment, the horse began leaping from one ice floe to another. Waves showered them with icy spray, so that Chen was soaked and shivering. But he held his tongue and said not a word. Finally, they reached the far shore. At once, Chen felt himself dry and warm. It wasn't long then till they came to Sun Palace. It looked just like his mother's brocade. He rode to the entrance, sprang from the horse, and hurried into a huge hall. Sitting there at their looms were dozens of fairy ladies who turned to stare at him, then whispered to each other excitedly. On each loom was a copy of his mother's brocade, and the brocade itself hung in the center of the room. A lady near the door rose from her loom to meet him. "My name is Lien, and I welcome you. You are the first mortal ever to reach our palace. What good fortune brings you here?" The fairy was so beautiful that for a moment Chen could only stare. Lian gazed shyly downward. "Dear lady, I have come for my mother's brocade." "So you are the widow's son," said Lian. "How we admire that brocade. None of us has been able to match it. We wish to keep it here till we can. But I must bring it home or my mother will die." Lian looked alarmed, and a flurry of whispers arose in the room. She stepped away to speak softly with several others, then returned to Chen. "We surely must not let that happen to her. Only let us keep the brocade for the rest of the day, so we can try to finish our own. Tomorrow you may take it back with you." "Thank you, dear lady," said Chen. The fairies worked busily to finish their brocades. Chen sat near Lian at her loom. As she wove, he told her about his life in the human world, and she told him about hers at Sun Palace. Many smiles and glances passed between them. When darkness fell, the fairies worked on by the light of a magic pearl. At last, Chen's eyes would stay open no longer, and he drifted to sleep on his chair. One by one, the fairies finished or left off and went out of the hall. Lian was the last one there, and it was almost dawn when she was done. She cut her brocade from the loom and held it beside the widow's. She sighed. "Mine is good, but the widow's is still better. If only she could come and teach us herself." Then Lian had an idea. With needle and thread, she embroidered a small image on the widow's brocade, an image of herself on the palace steps, and she gently cast a spell. Then she left the hall with a last long smiling gaze at Chen. When Chen woke up, the sun was just rising. He looked around the hall for Lian but saw no one. Though he longed to find her to say goodbye, he told himself, "I must not waste a moment." He rolled up his mother's brocade, rushed from the hall, and jumped on the horse. Back he raced, across the icy sea and over the fiery mountain. When he reached the old woman's hut, she was standing there waiting for him. "Hurry, Chen, your mother is dying. Put on these shoes or you'll never get there in time." Chen put them on. 1 step, 2, 3. Then he was racing over the countryside faster than he could believe possible. In no time, he was home. He rushed into the cottage and found the widow in bed, pale and quiet. "Mother!" Her eyes opened slowly. "Chen?" "Mother, I brought it." He unrolled the cloth onto the bed. "My brocade." The widow raised herself to look. Color came back to her face, and she seemed already stronger. "Chen, I need more light. Let's take it outside." He helped her out of the cottage and placed the brocade on a rock. But just then a sudden wind came, and the brocade rose slowly in the air. It stretched as it rose, growing larger and larger. till it filled their view completely. The palace was as large as Chen himself had seen it, and standing on the steps was the fairy lady Lian. Lian was beckoning with her hand. "Quickly," she called, "while the wind still blows. Step into the brocade." For a moment, Chen was too astounded to move. Then he took hold of his mother's arm, and together they stepped forward. There was a shimmering, and there they stood before Sun Palace. Lian rushed up to them, and the other fairies gathered around. She said to the widow, "Welcome, honored one. If it pleases you, we wish you to live with us and teach us the secrets of your craft." "Nothing could please me more," cried the widow. "But Chen, is it all right with you?" Chen looked in Lian's eyes and smiled. "Yes, mother, it's just fine with me." So the widow became teacher to the fairies, and Chen became husband to Lian. And people say there are no brocades finer than the ones they weave at Sun Palace.
In India, in the time of legend, there lived a king with many wives, but not one child. Morning and evening for 18 years, he faced the fire on the sacred altar and prayed for the gift of children. Finally, a shining goddess rose from the flames. "I am Savitri, child of the sun. By your prayers, you have won a daughter." Within a year, a daughter came to the king and his favorite wife. He named her Savitri after the goddess. Beauty and intelligence were the Princess Savitri's, and eyes that shone like the sun. So splendid was she, people thought she herself was a goddess. Yet when the time came for her to marry, no man asked for her. Her father told her, "Weak men turn away from radiance like yours. Go out and find a man worthy of you. Then I will arrange the marriage." In the company of servants and counselors, Savitri traveled from place to place. After many days, she came upon a hermitage by a river crossing. Here lived many who had left the towns and cities for a life of prayer and study. Savitri entered the hall of worship and bowed to the eldest teacher. As they spoke, a young man with shining eyes came into the hall. He guided another man, old and blind. "Who is that young man?" asked Savitri softly. "That is Prince Satyavan," said the teacher with a smile. "He guides his father, a king whose realm was conquered. It is well that Satyavan's name means son of truth, for no man is richer in virtue." When Savitri returned home, she found her father sitting with the holy seer named Narada. "Daughter," said the king, "have you found a man you wish to marry?" "Yes, father. His name is Satyavan." Narada gasped. "Not Satyavan. Princess, No man could be more worthy, but you must not marry him. I know the future. Satyavan will die 1 year from today." The king said, "Do you hear, daughter? Choose a different husband." Savitri trembled, but said, "I have chosen Satyavan, and I will not choose another. However long or short his life, I wish to share it." Soon the king rode with Savitri to arrange the marriage. Satyavan was overjoyed to be offered such a bride. But his father, the blind king, asked Savitri, "Can you bear the hard life of the hermitage? Will you wear our simple robe and our coat of matted bark? Will you eat only fruit and plants of the wild?" Savitri said, "I care nothing about comfort or hardship. In palace or in hermitage, I am content." That very day, Savitri and Satyavan walked hand in hand around the sacred fire in the hall of worship. In front of all the priests and hermits, they became husband and wife. For a year, they lived happily. But Savitri could never forget that Satyavan's death drew closer. Finally, only 3 days remained. Savitri entered the hall of worship and faced the sacred fire. There she prayed for 3 days and nights, not eating or sleeping. "My love," said Satyavan, "prayer and fasting are good, but why be this hard on yourself?" Savitri gave no answer. The sun was just rising when Savitri at last left the hall. She saw Satyavan heading for the forest, an axe on his shoulder. Savitri rushed to his side. "I will come with you." "Stay here, my love," said Satyavan. "You should eat and rest." But Savitri said, "My heart is set on going." Hand in hand, Savitri and Satyavan walked over wooded hills. They smelled the blossoms on flowering trees and paused beside clear streams. The cries of peacocks echoed through the woods. While Savitri rested, Satyavan chopped firewood from a fallen tree. Suddenly, he dropped his axe. "My head aches." Savitri rushed to him. She laid him down in the shade of a tree, his head on her lap. "My body is burning. What is wrong with me?" Satyavan's eyes closed. His breathing slowed. Savitri looked up. Coming through the woods to meet them was a princely man. He shone, though his skin was darker than the darkest night. His eyes and his robe were the red of blood. Trembling, Savitri asked, "Who are you?" A deep, gentle voice replied, "Princess, you see me only by the power of your prayer and fasting. I am Yama, god of death. Now is the time I must take the spirit of Satyavan." Yama took a small noose and passed it through Satyavan's breast as if through air. He drew out a tiny likeness of Satyavan, no bigger than a thumb. Satyavan's breathing stopped. Yama placed the likeness inside his robe. Happiness awaits your husband in my kingdom. Satyavan is a man of great virtue." Then Yama turned and headed south back to his domain. Savitri rose and started after him. Yama strode smoothly and swiftly through the woods, while Savitri struggled to keep up. At last, he stopped to face her. "Savitri, you cannot follow to the land of the dead." "Lord Yama, I know your duty is to take my husband, but my duty as his wife is to stay beside him." "Princess, that duty is at an end. Still, I admire your loyalty. I will grant you a favor. Anything but the life of your husband." Savitri said, "Please restore my father-in-law's kingdom and his sight." "His sight and his kingdom shall be restored." Yama again headed south. Savitri followed. Along a river bank, thorns and tall, sharp grass let Yama pass untouched, but they tore at Savitri's clothes and skin. "Savitri, you have come far enough." "Lord Yama, I know my husband will find happiness in your kingdom, but you carry away the happiness that is mine." "Princess, even love must bend to fate. Still, I admire your devotion. I will grant you another favor. Anything but the life of your husband." Savitri said, "Grant many more children to my father." "Your father shall have many more children." Yama once more turned south. Again, Savitri followed. Up a steep hill Yama glided, while Savitri clambered after him. At the top, he halted. "Savitri, I forbid you to come farther." "Lord Yama, you are respected and revered by all. Yet, no matter what may come, I will remain by Satyavan." "Princess, I tell you for the last time, you will not. Still, I can only admire your courage and your firmness. I will grant you one last favor. Anything but the life of your husband." "Then grant many children to me, and let them be children of Satyavan." Yama's eyes grew wide as he stared at Savitri. "You did not ask for your husband's life, yet I cannot grant your wish without releasing him. Princess, your wit is as strong as your will." Yama took out the spirit of Satyavan and removed the noose. The spirit flew north, quickly vanishing from sight. "Return, Savitri. You have won your husband's life." The sun was just setting when Savitri again laid Satyavan's head in her lap. His chest rose and fell. His eyes opened. "Is the day already gone? I have slept long." "But what is wrong, my love? You smile and cry at the same time." "My love," said Savitri, "let us return home." Yama was true to all he had promised. Savitri's father became father to many more. Satyavan's father regained both sight and kingdom. In time, Satyavan became king and Savitri his queen. They lived long and happily, blessed with many children. So they had no fear or tears when Yama came again to carry them to his kingdom. A long time ago, in a village by a lake, there lived a great hunter who was invisible. He was called the Hidden One. It was known that any young woman who could see him would become his bride. Many were the hopeful young women who visited his wigwam at the far end of the village. Each was tested by the hunter's sister, who was called the Patient One. But years passed, and none succeeded. In the same village lived two sisters who had lost their mother. The younger sister had a good heart, but the older one was jealous and cruel. While their father was out hunting, the older sister would torment the younger one, holding her down and burning her arms and face with sticks from the fire. "Don't you dare tell our father," she would say, "or next time will be worse." And when the father came home, he would ask in dismay, "Why is she burnt again?" The older sister would answer, "The stupid, clumsy thing. She was playing with a fire, just like you told her not to." The father would turn to the younger, "Is this true?" But she only bit her lip and said nothing. After a while, she had so many scars, she was called Little Scarface. She lost her long braids, too, when her sister singed them off, and she had to go barefoot and wear rags, for her sister would not allow her any skins to make moccasins or new clothes. Of course, the sister made up all different reasons to tell their father, and he would shake his head in sorrow and disappointment. One day, the older sister put on her finest clothes and many shiny strings of shell beads. "Do you know what I'm doing?" she asked Little Scarface. "I'm going to marry the Hidden One. Of course, that's something you could never dream of." Little Scarface bowed her head. When the older sister reached the wigwam at the edge of the village, she was greeted by the sister of the hunter. "You are welcome," said the Patient One. "My brother will return soon from the hunt. Come help me prepare the evening meal." The two of them worked a while until the sun was nearly down. Then the Patient One led the young woman to the shore of the lake. My brother comes, the patient one said, pointing along the shore. Do you see him? The young woman saw no one, but she had decided to pretend. Of course, there he is now. The eyes of the patient one narrowed. And what is his shoulder strap? A strip of rawhide, said the young woman, thinking it a safe guess. The patient one frowned. Let us return to the wigwam. They had just finished making the meal when a deep voice said, Greetings, my sister. The young woman jumped in surprise. She stared at the entrance, but saw no one. Greetings, my brother, replied the patient one. As the young woman watched with wide eyes, a moccasin appeared in midair and dropped to the floor, followed by another. A moment later, bits of food were rising from a birch bark tray near the fire and vanishing into an invisible mouth. The young woman turned to the patient one. When will our wedding take place? The patient one turned to her angrily. What wedding? Do you think my brother would marry a liar and a fool? The young woman ran, crying from the wigwam. All the next morning she stayed in bed, weeping and sobbing. Then little Scarface came to her. Sister, let me have skins to make moccasins and new clothes. It is my turn to visit the hidden one. How dare you, screamed the sister. She jumped up and slapped little Scarface, knocking her to the floor. Are you so stupid to think you can do what I couldn't? Even if you saw him, do you think he'd marry a pathetic thing like you? She sank back to the bed in tears. Little Scarface sat huddled for a long time, listening to her sister howl and sob. Then she rose and said again, It is my turn to visit the hidden one. Her sister stopped crying and stared in amazement. Little Scarface went to her father's chest and took out an old pair of moccasins. She put them on her own small feet. Then she went out to the woods. She chose a birch tree and carefully stripped off the bark in a single sheet. From this she made a suit of clothes which she put on in place of her rags. Then she started back through the village. Look at little Scarface, yelled a boy. She's dressed like a tree. Hey, little Scarface, a young man called. Are those moccasins big enough for you? I don't believe it, an old woman said. She's on her way to the hidden one. Little Scarface, called a young woman. Did you burn yourself and cut off your hair to look pretty for him? Ignoring their taunts and laughter, little Scarface walked on till she reached the wigwam at the village edge. The patient one regarded the young woman with surprise, but she told her, You are welcome. Little Scarface helped prepare the evening meal. When the sun was nearly down, the patient one led her to the lake. My brother comes, the patient one told her. Do you see him? Little Scarface gazed along the shore. "I'm not sure." Then her eyes lit in wonder. Yes, I see him. But how can there be such a one?" The patient one looked at her curiously. "What is his shoulder strap?" "His shoulder strap is the rainbow." The patient one's eyes grew wide. "And his bowstring?" "His bowstring is the Milky Way." The patient one smiled. "Let us return." When they reached the wigwam, the patient one took the strange clothes off little Scarface and washed her with water from a special jar. The young woman's scars disappeared, leaving her skin shining and smooth. A magic comb made the young woman's hair grow quickly to her waist, ready for braiding. Then the patient one opened a chest and took out a beautiful wedding outfit. Little Scarface had just put it on when a deep voice said, "Greetings, my sister." Little Scarface turned to the entrance and stared at the magnificent young hunter. As their eyes met, she saw the surprise in his. "Greetings, my brother," said the patient one. "You are discovered." The hidden one walked over to little Scarface and took her hands in his. "For years I have waited to find a woman of pure heart and brave spirit. Only such a one could see me. And now you shall be my bride." And so they were married. And from then on, little Scarface had a new name, the Lovely One, for she too had been hidden, and now was hidden no more. Long ago in a palace by the Red River, there lived a great mandarin and his daughter, Mean Wang. Like other young ladies of her position, Mean Wang was kept indoors, away from the eyes of admiring men. She spent most of her time in her room at the top of a tower. There she would sit on a bench by a moon-shaped window, reading or embroidering, chatting with her maid, and gazing out often at the garden and the river. One day, as she sat there, a song floated to her from the distance in a voice deep and sweet. She looked out and saw a fishing boat coming up the river. "Do you hear it?" she asked her maid. "How beautifully he sings." She listened again as the voice drew nearer. "My love is like a blossom in the breeze. My love is like a moonbeam on the waves." "He must be young and very handsome," said Mean Wang. She felt a sudden thrill. Perhaps he knows I am here and sings it just for me. The maid's eyes lit up. "My lady, perhaps he's a mandarin's son in disguise, the man you are destined to marry." Mean Wang felt a flush on her face and a stirring in her heart. She tried to make out the man's features, but he was too far off to see clearly. The boat and the song glided slowly up the river and away. "Yes," she said softly, "perhaps he is." All day long, Min Wang waited by the window, hoping to hear the singer again. The next day she waited too, and the next, but the voice did not return. "Why doesn't he come?" she asked her maid sadly. As the days passed, Min Wang grew pale and weak. At last she went to her bed and stayed there. The mandarin came to her. "Daughter, what's wrong?" "It's nothing, father," she said faintly. The mandarin sent for the doctor. But after seeing Min Wang, the doctor told him, "I can find no illness, and without an illness I can offer no cure." The weeks passed, and Min Wang grew no better. Then one day her maid came before the mandarin. "My lord, I know what ails your daughter. Min Wang is sick for love. To cure her, you must find the handsome young man who sings this song." And she sang it for him. "It will be done," said the mandarin, and he sent out a messenger at once. Days later, the messenger returned. "Lord, in no great house of this province does any young man know the song. But in a nearby village, I found a man who sings it, a fisherman named Truong Chi. I have brought him to the palace." "A fisherman?" said the mandarin in disbelief. "Let me see him." The messenger brought him in. The fisherman stood uneasily, his eyes wide as they cast about the richly furnished room. For a moment, the mandarin was too astounded to speak. The man was neither young nor handsome. His clothes were ragged, and he stank of fish. "Certainly no match for my daughter," thought the mandarin. "Somehow she must not realize." He gave his order to the messenger. "Bring the fisherman to my daughter's door and have him sing his song." Soon, Truong Chi stood anxiously outside the young lady's room. He could not understand why they brought him here. What could they want? He was just a fisherman, wishing only to make an honest living. He had hurt no one, done nothing wrong. At the messenger's signal, he nervously started to sing. "My love is like a blossom in the breeze. My love is like a moonbeam on the waves." In the room beyond the door, Min Wang's eyes flew open. "He's here," she cried to her maid. "How can that be? Oh, quickly, help me dress." Min Wang jumped from her bed. Never had she so swiftly clothed herself, put up her hair, made herself up. By the time the song drew to a close, she looked like a heavenly vision in flowing robes. "Now open the door," she said, trying to calm her fast beating heart. She forced herself to stand shyly, casting her eyes down in the manner proper to a modest young lady. As the door pulled open, Truong-chi shrank back, not knowing what to expect. Then all at once he found himself gazing on the greatest beauty he had ever known. He felt his heart leap, and in that moment, he fell deeply, hopelessly, desperately in love. Min Wang could not wait a moment longer. She lifted her eyes to look upon her beloved, and in that moment, her eyes grew wide and she burst out laughing. A mandarin's son? Her destined love? Why, he was nothing but a common fisherman. How terribly, terribly silly she'd been. Shaking with mirth at her folly, she turned her head away and whispered, "Close the door." The door shut in Truong-chi's face. He stood there frozen, the young lady's laughter ringing in his ears. He felt his heart grow cold and hard. Truong-chi was sent home, but he could not go on as before. Hardly eating or sleeping, he grew pale and ill. He no longer cared if he lived or died, and so he died. The villagers found him on the sleeping mat in his hut. On his chest sat a large crystal. "What is it?" a man asked. "It is his heart," said a wise old woman. The laugh of the mandarin's daughter wounded it so deeply, it turned hard to stop the pain. "What do we do with it?" asked a young woman. "It is very lovely, like one of his songs." "We should put it in his boat," said another young man, "and let it float down the sea." At sundown, they set the crystal in the fisherman's boat. Then they pushed the boat from its mooring and watched in sorrow as it drifted down the river and out of sight. But the boat did not drift to sea. It came to shore by the mandarin's palace, and so it was that the mandarin found it at sunrise as he strolled along the bank. "What have we here?" he said, reaching in to pick up the crystal. He turned it over in his hand, examining and admiring it. "What a splendid gift the river has brought." A few days later, when no one had claimed it, the mandarin sent it to a turner to be made into a teacup. He brought the cup one evening to Min Wang's room. "A gift for my lovely daughter," he said. "Oh, Father, it's beautiful. I can hardly wait to drink from it." When the mandarin left, she told her maid, "It's late, so you can go to bed. But first, make me some tea so I can drink from the cup." The maid finished her task and went off. Min Wang poured the tea, blew out the candles on the table, and carried the cup to her window seat. A full moon shone into the room, and looking out, she watched the moonlight play upon the river. The scent of blossoms drifted from the garden. Min Wang lifted the cup to her lips, but just as she was about to drink, she cried out in surprise and fear. She quickly set the cup down on the bench. On the surface of the tea was the face of Truong-chi, gazing at her with eyes filled with love. And now his sweet song filled the room, familiar but a little changed. Min Wang is like a blossom in the breeze. as she had seen so briefly through the open door, and she remembered her laugh. What have I done? I was so cruel. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know. I'm sorry. So very, very sorry. Her eyes filled with tears. A single tear dropped into the cup. It was enough. The crystal melted away, releasing the spirit of Truong Chi. Then Min Wang heard the song one last time, floating off over the river. Min Wang is like a blossom in the breeze. Min Wang is like a moonbeam on the waves. Goodbye, said Min Wang softly. Goodbye. It was not many months more when Min Wang was given in marriage to the son of a great mandarin. He was young and handsome, and she felt that her dreams had come true. Yet now, as she gazed on a different garden and a different view of the river, she often still heard the song of the fisherman echo softly in her heart. On the banks of the Amazon River, in a clearing in the forest, there once lived a girl named Chimichua. She dwelt with her family and relatives in a big pavilion house called a maloka. While the boys of the maloka fished and hunted with the men, Chimichua and the other girls helped the women with household chores or in the farm plots nearby. Like the other girls, Chimichua never stepped far into the forest. She knew how full it was of fierce animals and harmful spirits, and how easy it was to get lost in. Still, she would listen, wide-eyed, when the elders told stories about that other world, and sometimes she would go just a little way in, gazing among the giant trees and wondering what she might find farther on. One day, as Chimichua was making a basket, she looked up and saw a big morpho butterfly hovering right before her. Sunlight danced on its shimmering blue wings. "You are the most magical creature in the world," Chimichua said dreamily. "I wish I could be like you." The butterfly dipped as if in answer, then flew toward the edge of the clearing. Chimichua set down her basket and started after it, imitating its lazy flight. Among the trees she followed, swooping and circling and flapping her arms. She played like this for a long time, until the butterfly passed between some vines and disappeared. Suddenly, Chimichua realized she had gone too far into the forest. There was no path, and the leaves of the tall trees made a canopy that hid the sun. She could not tell which way she had come. "Mother, Father, anyone," she shouted, but no one came. "Oh no," she said softly. "How will I find my way back?" Chimichua wandered anxiously about, hoping to find a path. After a while, she heard a tap, tap, tapping. "Someone must be working in the forest," she said hopefully, and she followed the sound. But when she got close, she saw it was just a woodpecker. Chimichua sadly shook her head. "If only you were human," she said. "You could show me the way home." "Why would I have to be human?" asked the woodpecker. "I could just show you as I am." Startled but glad to hear it talk, Chimijua said eagerly, "Oh, would you?" "Can't you see I'm busy?" said the woodpecker. "You humans are so conceited. You think everyone else is here to serve you. But in the forest, a woodpecker is just as important as a human." And it flew off. "I didn't mean anything bad," said Chimijua to herself. "I just want to go home." More uneasy than ever, Chimijua walked farther. All at once she came upon a maloka, and sitting within it was a woman weaving a hammock. "Oh, grandmother!" cried Chimijua joyfully, addressing the woman with the term proper for an elder. "I'm so glad to find someone here. I was afraid I would die in the forest." But just as she stepped into the maloka, the roof began to flap, and the maloka and the woman together rose into the air. Then Chimijua saw it was really a tinamou bird that had taken a magical form. It flew to a branch above. "Don't you grandmother me," screeched the bird. "How many of my people have your relatives hunted and killed? How many have you cooked and eaten? Don't you dare ask me for my help." And it too flew away. "The animals here all seem to hate me," said Chimijua sorrowfully. "But I can't help being human." Chimijua wandered on, feeling more and more hopeless, and hungry now as well. Suddenly, a sorva fruit dropped to the ground. She picked it up and ate it greedily. Then another dropped nearby. Chimijua looked up and saw why. A band of spider monkeys was feeding in the forest canopy high above, and now and then a fruit would slip from their hands. "I'll just follow the monkeys," Chimijua told herself. "Then at least I won't starve." And for the rest of that day, she walked along beneath them, eating any fruit they dropped. But her fears grew fresh as daylight faded and night came to the forest. In the deepening darkness, Chimijua saw the monkey start to climb down, and she hid herself to watch. To her amazement, as the monkeys reached the ground, each one changed to the form of a human. Chimijua could not help but gasp, and within a moment, the monkey people had surrounded her. "Why, it's Chimijua," said a monkey man with a friendly voice. "What are you doing here?" Chimijua stammered, "I followed a butterfly into the forest and I can't find my way home." "You poor girl," said a monkey woman. "Don't worry, we'll bring you there tomorrow." "Oh, thank you," cried Chimijua. "But where will I stay tonight?" "Why don't you come with us to the festival?" asked the monkey man. "We've been invited by the Lord of the Monkeys." They soon arrived at a big maloka. When the monkey lord saw Chimijua, he demanded, "Human, why have you come uninvited?" "We found her and brought her along," the monkey woman told him. The monkey lord grunted and said nothing more, but he eyed the girl in a way that made her shiver. Many more monkey people had arrived, all in human form. Some wore animal costumes of bark cloth with wooden masks. Others had designs painted on their faces with black jenipa dye. Everyone drank from gourds full of manioc beer. Then some of the monkey people rose to begin the dance. With the monkey lord at their head, they marched in torchlight around the inside of the maloka, beating drums and shaking rattlesticks. Others sang softly or played bone flutes. Chimijua watched it all in wonder. She told her friend the monkey woman, "This is just like the festivals of my own people." Late that night, when all had retired to their hammocks, Chimijua was kept awake by the snoring of the monkey lord. After a while, something about it caught her ear. "That's strange," she told herself. "It sounds almost like words." The girl listened carefully and heard, "I will devour Chimijua. I will devour Chimijua." "Grandfather," she cried in terror. "What? Who's that?" said the monkey lord, startled from his sleep. "It's Chimijua," said the girl. "You said in your sleep you would devour me." "How could I say that?" he demanded. "Monkeys don't eat people." "No, that was just foolish talk of this mouth of mine. Pay no attention." He took a long swig of manioc beer and went back to sleep. Soon the girl heard again, "I will devour Chimijua. I will devour Chimijua." But this time the snores were more like growls. Chimijua looked over at the monkey lord's hammock. To her horror, she saw not a human form, but a powerful animal with black spots. The Lord of Monkeys was not a monkey at all. He was a jaguar. Chimijua's heart beat wildly. As quietly as she could, she slipped from her hammock and grabbed a torch. Then she ran headlong through the night. When Chimijua stopped at last to rest, daylight had begun to filter through the forest canopy. She sat down among the root buttresses of a kapok tree and began to cry. "I hate this forest," she said fiercely. "Nothing here makes sense." "Are you sure?" asked a tiny voice. Quickly wiping her eyes, Chimijua looked up. On a branch of the kapok was a morpho butterfly, the largest she had ever seen. It waved at her with brilliant blue wings. "Oh, grandmother," said Chimijua, "nothing here is what it seems. Everything changes into something else." "Dear Chimijua," said the butterfly gently, "that is the way of the forest. Among your own people, things change slowly and are mostly what they seem. But your human world is a tiny one. All around lies a much larger world, and you can't expect it to behave the same." "But if I can't understand the forest," cried Chimijua, "how will I ever get home?" "I will lead you there myself," said the butterfly. "Oh, grandmother, will you?" said Chimijua. "Certainly," said the butterfly. "Just follow me." It wasn't long till they came to the banks of the Amazon. Then Chimijua saw with astonishment that the boat landing of her people was on the other side. "I crossed the river without knowing it," she cried. "But that's impossible." "Impossible?" said the butterfly. "I mean," said Chimijua carefully, "I don't understand how it happened. But now how will I get back across?" That's simple, said the Morpho. I'll change you to a butterfly. And it began to chant over and over. Wings of blue drinks the dew. Wings of blue drinks the dew. Wings of blue drinks the dew. Chimijua felt herself grow smaller, while her arms grew wide and thin. Soon she was fluttering and hovering beside the other. I'm a butterfly, she cried. They started across the wide water, their wings glistening in the sun. I feel so light and graceful, said Chimijua. I wish this would never end. Before long, they reached the landing, where a path to the Maloka led into the forest. The instant Chimijua touched the ground, she was changed back to human form. I will leave you here, said the butterfly. Farewell, Chimijua. Oh, grandmother, cried the girl, take me with you. I want to be a butterfly forever. That would not be right, said the butterfly. You belong with your people who love you and care for you. But never mind, Chimijua. Now that you have been one of us, you will always have something of the forest within you. The girl waved as the butterfly flew off. Goodbye, grandmother. Then Chimijua turned home with a heart that had wings of a butterfly.